Welcome to the Startup Grind.
To Thomas Korte, here we go.
This is true rockstar welcome. I like this. I'm going to try this microphone like this because otherwise I feel like they're at McDonald's. What would you like to have today? How can I help you? Is the microphone all right?
Can you hear it in the back?
You can't hear me? Oh, is it on? It should be on. If there's a red dot on, is it on?
It's not. There you go.
Oh, that's me. That's me amplified. All right.
Is that better?
You guys can hear me? Yep?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, you're gonna take a red eye to New York, I hear, after this.
I am, yes.
Okay. Tell us about.
Which means that I'm here until 10 o'clock.
Okay. And will you work tomorrow, or are you gonna go?
Of course, meeting Sunday night.
Okay. And favorite airport in New York? What are you flying to?
I fly to JFK because that's the good red eye flight. But I hate all airports. Who likes airports? Actually, San Francisco is pretty good, right? Terminal 2, San Francisco is pretty good.
What led to this expansion? You really, your roots are here, but you've now expanded this class to New York. Where did that come from? When did you start doing that?
So as we started AngelPad, we've always thought about a second hub. We always felt New York is a natural extension. At the time, in 2010, I didn't feel New York was ready for it.
Yeah.
We started here in San Francisco. At the time, there was no accelerator in San Francisco itself. It was only down the peninsula. And a couple of years ago, we started taking it really seriously, looking at, does it make sense to be there? And one big part of going to New York and also being here in New York is to really create a bridge between the two, big startup hubs now. And they have very different cultures, but I think both can learn from each other, and certainly both the companies that we've seen prosper and do really well, are really in both places. Engineering is great here, building companies great here. Your customers are more likely over there somewhere. So it's good to go to New York often.
You saying, like, if you're building a company in the Valley or the extended Valley, that you're going to get more of an early adopter crowd, perhaps, that's not really representative of the rest of the world, and where in New York you might get more of a group that's representative? What do you mean?
You just have a different set of companies. So when you build your company and you think about your early customers, many times you start thinking about other startups. They have the same similar problems that you have. From an investment perspective or from building large companies, other startups are not great customers. They're pretty terrible customers, and many investors will actually discount any customers that you have that are startups like you or a couple of years ahead of you. Now, I'm not saying don't have those. Those are great customers because they understand what you do. They help you iterate. They go through the same process, and they're willing to take a chance on you the same way someone did take a chance on them. If you go to the East Coast, you have real companies. You have companies that have been around for many, many years and have processes and approval systems, all this. And if you get to them, and eventually, certainly as an enterprise company or any company in the B2B world, you have to get to them, you really are starting to build a real business in the enterprise world. The other part is companies that we really like around innovation in consumer mobile, and something like Postmates, which is one of our companies, that is changing the equation of how things are delivered in dense urban areas. New York is a fantastic place for them to be, and San Francisco is too. If you build one of those companies and you're really successful in San Francisco, there's a very good chance you're successful somewhere else as well. But the reality is also that everyone in San Francisco understands the technology you're building and is adopting it. Will that be the case in New York? Will that be the case in Miami? I had a great anecdote. I was on the phone this morning, just like how savvy people are in San Francisco. I was on the phone this morning when I was in a taxi driving to one of the meetings, and I was talking to a founder.
Like a real taxi
like a real taxi.
Yellow and everything?
Yeah, it was yellow.
Cool.
It was nice. It was actually
I've heard about him,
It
yeah.
was nice.
Was it?
Yeah. It was the first taxi.
You felt safe?
Yeah. It was nicer than New York because you didn't have that plastic
glass,
thing.
yeah.
Right, exactly. But I was on the phone the whole time, and And I was talking to this founder who was contemplating selling his company, or selling the company. And I said, look, you do what you think is right, but like don't sell too early. Like it's, I think we can build something bigger and all that. And I hung up, and the guy was like this very, very nice older Indian gentleman. He said, yeah, tell him not to sell early, not early. And this is the taxi driver in San Francisco, right? So the level of sophistication of what we all do in San Francisco is through the roof, right? So if you go to New York and you tell people you work for a startup, they're like, startup, what's that? And it's just not quite at a different level, which is great because you can take some of the ideas to real people that are not waiting in line at iPhone and read TechCrunch, even if they're cab drivers.
Is he going to become an LP in your fund or anything?
He said, you can pay in options. No, he didn't say that.
He's not an angel investor. I mean, that's a little concerning though, right? I mean, that the taxi driver is giving startup advice. This has kind of become a trend actually, where everyone's an advisor, everyone's a mentor, everyone's got an opinion on how entrepreneurs can be successful. And how does an entrepreneur distill the people that are giving good advice, or the people they should take advice from the people that they shouldn't maybe be listening, and maybe they should just be getting rides from in the taxi?
Right. He probably hears a lot. He probably has lots of insights.
He probably does have good insights, yeah.
Hanging out in front of like the Dropbox
Coupa and stuff, yeah.
Advisors is a really difficult thing to find and to have good ones. And part of that is why we have so few or none at AngelPad. But I think as a startup founder, you have to figure out who is a great advisor for a domain subject. So look, if does the microphone come in and out, or is it just me? Is it okay? Okay.
You might have to go Britney Spears style here in a minute.
I
know you're fighting.
Back row, you tell me if you can. Is it good?
Yes,
right. So advisors you look for is the domain experts, right? Someone that can help you with UX design, or you can run some ideas by about how to scaling certain technologies, or is really good at AWS or something like that, right? Then you have the people that have gone through the same grind that you have, and you want to look for people that have done this recently, because building a company 5 years ago was a very, very, very different animal than building a company today. 5-6 years ago, Facebook was still a private social network for universities. There was no iPhone. Google had, just launched Gmail a year before that. So the world was very different back then. So if you look for people that go through the grind, look for them that have done it last year, right? And not the ones that did it in 1999. I think in general, just you don't really need advisors, right? You're founders. You figure out what to do. There's a problem at hand. You figure out, you make a decision. Sometimes you make the right ones, sometimes the wrong ones. Let's hope that's more often the right ones. And you build a company one day at a time.
So this is
no one builds the company for you. No advisor.
Sure.
Advisors. Oftentimes, advisors give very general advice. That I've seen people doing like this or like this, and every single company is so unique. And in a way, you want to be unique because if you don't do something differently, you're just doing it the way it's been done before, and I think by definition you're not disrupting. And what you want to do is disrupt. Look at how Yammer, like when Yammer came along, no one really has thought of the bottoms-up approach to enterprise sale, where you infiltrate the company by people just using it and eventually basically forcing the company to pay you to have more admin rights over your customers. If they would have asked Mark Benioff, hey, how do we grow this enterprise company? He would have said, oh, charge $29 or $79. And if you would have asked Larry Ellison, he would have said, charge $200,000. So things go very quickly.
With Oracle World. Or
that's right.
This is very interesting because it seems totally the opposite of what actually you do, which is you're incubating companies, you're giving them advice, you're supporting them, you're very hands-on with them. And in my own experience, look, I trace back some of my best decisions to getting good advice from really smart people. And so maybe I'm an anomaly, but I like you hear so much about mentors and advisors. Is it important at different stages? Is it like when you're getting a company and it's pre-money and it's right at the beginning? Is it like, hey, that hands-on, somebody's in the workshop with you? I mean, that's a different kind of advice than like the person you see once a week or once a month or once a quarter, something like that.
Yes, I think it is. I think it's very different. Let me just briefly talk about advisors versus mentors. I think that's
Sure.
a very important distinction.
Yeah.
And I think people that have given me advice are doing more mentors.
They're
than
mentors,
advisors.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think mentors are actually very good. But mentors don't give you advice on how to do something. Mentors help you reflect and help you to set up frameworks on how to do certain things because they've done it and it worked for them. But they don't tell you what to do, right? A mentor is much more like a shrink than a dentist who's fixing it, right? And so I think it's different, important distinction. And everyone should try to find mentors, people that help them, and often it's peers. It doesn't have to be that person that is 20 years old and then you like in the classic sense of like, oh, he's done that and now he's successful. Your mentors, you know. Sometimes it can be people that are your peers in your company, or someone that has started a company recently and has gone through the same. Like, gee, you know, like I'm gonna have to fire somebody. Like how do I deal with that? What do I tell my team? You know, he won't tell you what to tell them. He say this is how I have, you know, this is how the framework I set up to do that. Just on mentoring specifically and what I do or what we do advice. I don't see myself as an advisor to any of the companies. I see myself as a co-founder for 4 months. Like I am with these companies every single day. Every single day we have an iteration of something, and we really go very, very deep down to the core of what this company is going to do, how it's going to be big, how we're going to acquire customers, how we're going to do anything, how we're going to get that visa for the founder, right? That is still, you know, who's still on a B1 or something in the country. You know, I retire as a founder very quickly because I can't be and I don't want to be involved in companies past a certain stage because it's the founder's company and they go through the grind. They grow the company, they hire people, they get their office and build their own culture. But in this very, very, you know, pivotal time for the company, I consider myself a co-founder of the company.
It's really interesting. And I think, again, totally unique to the incubator space. It's funny that you know, people haven't, there are other incubators that I would say people have tried to rip off. There are very few that have tried to rip off your model, or those that have been so unsuccessful no one knows who they are. So how have you, you know, first of all, how did you have the skills for that to be so useful? I mean, you haven't started tons of companies. You had this very deep experience at Google, which maybe you could tell us about.
Yeah.
You know, if, you know, imagine that, you know, an entrepreneur listening to this is saying, hey, maybe I should go into AngelPad. Like, first of all, what skills do you bring to the table to make that advice so useful? Because it seems to be quite useful.
Yeah. So I spent 7 years at Google. At Google, I had, I think, 5 different roles in total. And part of that reason is because I get very impatient when I do something for longer than a year or so. Well, I guess AngelPad has kept me busy, but partially.
But you're founding new companies
exactly.
Exactly.
But no, I'm very impatient, and I try to figure things out. And when I'm asked them, I like to move on. And I've done that. I've done that at Google. I've done it at every job. I've done that when I was little. You know, I was that, you know, 15-year-old that tried to optimize the train schedule, coming in and out of, you know, how to make it more efficient to get people in and out of trains. I can't help but trying to optimize things and make them run smoother or better. It's terrible because I always see the faults coming. My wife, she always makes when she shows me something and I'm like, oh, there's a thread hanging out. She's like, oh, seriously? Like that's what you see? So I think it's just, and I think it's a very important trait for entrepreneurs. And you know, if you think about starting a company, or if you have kids and try to figure out how to teach them entrepreneurship, you know, I think entrepreneurship is about curiosity and solving problems. And if you walked in here and try to figure out like how does this thing make money? Is this a business? Is this a nonprofit? You know, if you try to figure out you know, just things along the way, you probably have it started with the DNA of a good entrepreneur who's just always looking like to figure stuff out. Like this should be better. Like why do we still drive cars? And I know this sounds easy to say now, but it's the same question that we asked 10 years ago at Google when no one was. I remember a meeting when we started talking about maps and Sergey was talking about I bought a camera. Why don't we just take pictures of everything? And it seemed like so out there that we can take pictures of streets. And it's not that long ago. It really is, less than 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I went there.
Well, you're talking about Google and some of those experiences. It sounds like Google is much bigger now than it was when you were there, but it was still pretty entrepreneurial, and there are pockets in there that are still very entrepreneurial. But you don't have every person coming out of Google starting an incubator or starting a company either. So I just wonder what made that different for you? How?
Yeah, I think early on at Google, there was no one, like everything we did seemed like it was done for the first time.
Yeah.
In hindsight, it wasn't probably, but everything, the way the company was built, the way it was organized, the way Larry and Sergey ran it, the way Eric eventually, agreed to run it, everything was different. I arrived there, and when I arrived, there were about 400 people total at Google, about 120 or so in Mountain View where I worked. And first thing they said, "Oh, I think your office is there. You have to assemble your desk." Okay, so you assemble your desk, and you sit there like, now what do I do? And I went to my boss, I'm like, so. Like,
what year did you get there?
In 2002.
2002.
Yes.
Okay.
And he said, "Oh, just go on the internet and read everything. Just read everything and then figure something out to do." Okay. What's my job title? I'll figure it out. So you figure it out, and that's probably,
brings a lot of confidence when you go into a new company and that's your first day.
Yeah, it's very empowering actually, and it's what I tell founders often is like, look, you're founders, figure it out. Like you have a problem, go figure it out, and then make a decision. Indecisiveness is killing you, and it's taking the most time. Just decide, move on. Most of the time you'll never know if you made a mistake anyway, right? It's not like wrong decision, go back to start. Weeks, months, or years later, it was the right thing.
At least moving in some direction is better than not moving.
Yes, and running faster. As entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs inside a company, just run faster. Like everything you do, work harder, stay longer. Think more about it, put in the extra effort. And you're ahead of 95% of the people out there already, and frankly 90% of the other founders around you. There really is something to be said about working harder and running faster. If you're 2 years into your company and you're not exhausted every night and literally every weekend you give you that one day to recoup and you're like, I'm gonna die, you're not running fast enough.
I'll just share the story because it backs up what you just said, but when I was in London, one of the people that works, we have about 1,000 people that work on StarGrind. One of them said, I said, well, how do you think things are going? And he said, I'm not sure that about all the decisions that you make, but at least we're moving. And I was like, is that like a backhanded, compliment or something? But it's true. It's if you can just keep the ball in the air, if you can, and like you said,
and things take on a dynamic. Look at what you've created. It's you look back 4 or 5 years, you could barely imagine like what this could look like. Now you have 1,000 chapters. I think it's the same for a startup. Things take on its own dynamic, and as a founder, you kind of have to control that. And early on, when it's just you and your co-founders, or maybe just you as a single founder, it doesn't feel like that snowball is really happening. It's like, nothing is happening, and I have to do everything, and then the lawyer asks you for something, and all this stuff that you deal with. Eventually, kind of like things start to move, and it becomes like this energy in itself. And then for you as founders and eventually executives of your company, it's really about controlling that snowball and make sure it goes the right direction.
Tell us about how AngelPad came about. When did you decide to leave Google, and how did you get AngelPad started?
So I had a very hard time leaving Google. It was a very, very tough decision for me. I love the place.
Did you cry?
To this day, I think I may have.
You didn't cry?
No. But it makes a better story. When I was working at Google, I started to invest in companies, small amounts, typical angel investor, kind of 25K checks. And as I was doing this, very quickly, it starts to be very uncomfortable with if you invest in a company that could be bought by Google tomorrow. It actually happened with one company. I was investing in it, we were in the final stage, and they said, oh, actually we were acquired by Google. I was like, whoa, this is getting a bit strange. So I realized I need to either do that or that, and I was ready to do something new. So I left Google to become a full-time angel investor. That sounded like really cool at the time. And I started investing in a lot of companies. Among them, a lot of companies that came out of YC very, very early on in 2007, the second, third batch. Heroku was one of them, which did phenomenally well. And as an angel investor, and this is actually important when you talk to investors and when you talk to recent angel investors, as an angel investor, your intention is not necessarily to write a check and make lots of money back. Your idea is that you give back to the community, you help founders, you work on lots of different companies and kind of guide them. And as you do this more professionally, very quickly you understand, actually I don't have time for it, and they don't have time for it either. And when a company actually does receive funding, they're kind of on a path that they have to go down for a while, right? They've pitched something, they raised X $100,000, and they can't just start pivoting the next day. So it's often that you fund a company and you're like, oh, did you think about this? Did you think about this? And the reality is you just don't have enough time, and they don't have enough time to meet you every couple of weeks or so, which is not that useful anyway, as I explained earlier. So I decided that that's not for me. I don't want to be an investor, a professional angel investor that just looks at this as a financial diversification. I take 5% of how much I own and put it into angel investing. For me, this was a job. I wanted to do this helping companies. So there were a lot of things that I liked about what Y Combinator did, and there were some things that I would do very, very differently. So I decided to start AngelPad and take the bare bones of what Y Combinator and Techstars have created and do it so it fits the mold that I would want. And that was it. And very early on, I went to a friend and said, what do you think about this? And he said, that sounds great. And we all pulled a little bit of money into it, and next thing we knew, we had our first class. Very big step was to sign a 3-year lease on an office. 3 years seemed like an eternity. It was like, oh my God, we're going to sign a 3-year lease. And then 3 years later, it was like, what? It's already over? That was fast.
You put it very nicely about in terms of there were things you would do or not do from what you saw from YC or some of these other people. You've been called the anti-Y Combinator, which I think is meant as a huge compliment. And I wonder if you could talk about some of these things, like what are the differences from AngelPad and anyone else, not just Y Combinator, Techstars or 500, any of these things, like what makes AngelPad different?
Right, so AngelPad runs differently in the way, I think that in many different ways. How we select companies.
How do you select companies?
So we have an open application process. We wanted to be as low barrier as possible. We actually like the idea that people, out of network, people that don't sit on a Thursday night here and have access to knowledge everywhere, but people that are somewhere in Denver or in London or in Tel Aviv can just apply on the website. That was one of the first principles. We asked for a video, 2-minute video, which is actually really important to kind of get a feel for the team, and then we ask a bunch of questions. We take it from there. About 10% of those we interview. So we usually get around 2,000 applications. We end up interviewing about 200 people, 150 to 200 teams in person, and then from there we select 12 companies. So we have a very, very, very strong filter along the way to get to a very small set of companies, and it is very important for us to stay at this 12 company level. We did one cohort, AngelPad 2, with 15 companies, and quickly realized that we just don't have enough time to work with 15 companies at the same time. 12 companies, I can meet every single company is a half hour a day, a half hour on one day, and go through it in one day and still have lunch. That was the basic principle. And then the day after, I can meet with half of them for longer, and so on. We are in the same space. It's very important for me to have an office where all the founders come together. I certainly am an important part of AngelPad, but so are the people around you. The people that we select is from a huge pool, so the people that sit around you are as talented, as ambitious, as accomplished as you are, and they come from very different walks of life. So being in this tight space for a very intense time, you create these bonds that are, the bonds that the founders have with each other, they are so much stronger than even that they have with me, right? They really have this peer network that goes through exactly the same journey they've gone through, and they become very close friends. It's really a support network way past AngelPad. And then certainly the people that have gone through the same experience, because it's a quite intense experience. People do really compare it to a bootcamp experience that we do, because it is so intense, and we push so hard, and we push really hard. People just like,
Are you working like 7 days a week hard, or what do you mean by hard?
The founders certainly work 7 days a week.
For the 4 months?
I don't.
Yeah.
But it's
well, then do you have co-founder conflicts because they're working harder if you're co-founding with them?
No, in that sense, I'm not a co-founder.
Okay.
No, it's not about the hours necessarily, but just the intensity of figuring things out and failing and succeeding and having the highs and the lows, and it just everything is very, very intense. And one of the biggest challenges that you run into as founders is that you have no accountability to anybody, which is in a way great, but it also doesn't put that pressure on you to get something done. I was always the kid that turned in the application or the paper on the last minute of the last day, right? And if there wasn't a deadline, it would have never happened. So we are that deadline, right? That next meeting with me is 3 days out, and there's questions that we need to answer, and sometimes they answered in a 6-hour workday, and 2 hours happy hours, and sometimes they answered in a 12-hour workday. But it's really intense, through the process. It's exhausting for everybody, but also very exhilarating. And the people that have gone through AngelPad have the same bond with the teams before, because they've gone through the very, very similar experience. So that's the second part, that we are all together in this office. And then the last part really is about the alumni network. And I should mention, as I did earlier, we don't have mentors coming in, so there's no curriculum, there's no class where people listen to me explain how AdWords works or something like this. It really is a one-on-one the whole time. If companies have needs, if we really do need to figure out, SEM or SEO or Facebook, or have to have a backdoor API access to LinkedIn or something like this, like, we know a lot of people through the network, and we can get people to that. But no one comes in to tell founders, oh, that's not a great market. You should be thinking about this market.
Yeah. Another really interesting thing, too, is that none of the investors in your network, which is pretty huge, have access to these companies until they're done.
Yes.
And talk about why you do that. That's I don't know of any other incubator that does that. There may be some that exist, but none of the top ones do that at all. So why is that? Why do you do that?
Yes,
and why does it work?
Right. So it was really important for me, partially from experience, having dealt with Y Combinator and Techstars when I was an active investor in their companies, to see the preferred access for certain investors, and it just doesn't serve the companies well, I think, to create an artificial scarcity of access to get funding. Our companies get funded. Every single one of our companies gets, not every single one, but like a very high percentage gets funded. So I didn't want to put any game theory to increasing the chances. I wanted to find the right investors. I wanted to meet all the investors, So we don't need to have them there before. The other part is we actually need the time with them. We only have 10, 12 weeks with them. So if they see investors 6 weeks in, they look like crap, right? Because we just deconstructed everything. We're at the lowest point of stopping to believe that this is actually a business. The last thing I want is to see the bride 3 hours before you walk down the aisle because she's putting on her stuff. She's not ready. It's the same thing for the startups. We're ready at demo day. That's when our fundraising starts. It creates another dynamic, which is that investors are actually not worried about having to be nice to me to have access to these companies. They just look, here's the product, here's the companies, everyone has access to them. None of them, our companies always have open rounds, or there's no company that says, oh, we have 100K left in the round, and dear investors, if you want to invest, you gotta give me a check. Now, I tell founders, if someone offers you a check at demo day, like that is probably not an investor you want to deal with. It's a process, it takes time, you meet the people, you're selling a piece of your company to them that you will never get back. You will have to deal with this investor. You make sure you at least don't hate them. And best case, like them.
What percentage of investors do entrepreneurs actually like?
I would say a fairly high percentage of the people that we actively pursue.
Okay.
And the network works, the AngelPad alumni networks works really great for that because I don't make introductions to investors.
Yeah.
Because I'm biased, right? I mean, I will tell every investor, every single company is the best one, and I will neglect every information why they should invest in it.
So it's the onus is on the investor to come
it's
and
their
learn
job.
about them.
It's your job to figure out if you want this company or not. Don't rely on my judgment.
Do you help with the negotiations once those
Yes.
investors
So what's really important is that all the introductions happen from the other founders of AngelPad that actually know the investors, have taken the investments, have met with them, had good, had bad experiences. So it's a self-cleansing process because no AngelPad founder is going to introduce to somebody that they had a bad experience with or have not gotten money from. So it kind of we tend to have the same group of investors that funds our companies for that very reason.
Yeah, I'd love to just talk through, this exercise of, and imagine that the people in this room, the people watching or listening, that they've maybe just gotten accepted into AngelPad, and I think sometimes, if you apply for an incubator or if you apply for something and you don't get in, that still using those deadlines can still be a really powerful motivator, saying, okay, you know what, like, we're gonna act like maybe we did get in, and we're gonna take it seriously, and we're gonna try to hit these milestones and use it to push us. And so I just, maybe we could imagine that for a second, that everyone in this room, or everyone listening, got into AngelPad,
Yeah.
and it's our first day, and it starts today, and we've got 12 weeks. What are you gonna tell us? What do we need to achieve in the next 12 weeks? What kind of growth do we need to see? Where do we need to be 12 weeks from now to be AngelPad approved?
Right. So this is going to be unsatisfying. There is not one answer.
You can't give us one answer.
I cannot, because companies are at different stages.
Yeah.
Even at AngelPad, there's companies that are at the idea stage. It's rare,
Yeah.
but we do have sometimes companies that just are really at the idea stage. So there's a lot of hypotheses we have to test. We have to create a hypothesis, we have to test it, we have to figure out if there is something, we got to figure out how big the market is, if it supports a large outcome, all these things. If we have a company that has an MVP and something is working already, we need to figure out if what we're going after as a target market makes sense. Is it a large enough market to actually create a venture-backed company? And remind me about venture-backed company is a very important word. Is the wedge that we're tackling the right one to tackle to get to adjacent spaces? So when you look at a market that you're tackling, you want to pick a really big market, like giant market, and then figure out how do we take over this market by starting with something very specific and are really good at that. So Uber somehow is everyone's favorite example, is mine too. Uber is gonna change the way things are moving, starting with people anywhere in the world. But when they started, it was basically an easier way for rich people to get their car service. It was very specific, very targeted, and at the time people were marketing it as a small service. How big is the black car market? I mean, how many people can afford a black car to the airport? I mean, I didn't take black cars pre-Uber to the airport. I'm sure most of you didn't, and today you all take Uber or UberX to the airport. So figure out what that wedge is. We spend a lot of time on that. Traction always helps. Figuring out how to acquire customers, and not necessarily having this beautiful graph up and to the right that you see in every presentation. I mean, investors look straight through that, right? And look, we have them in every single presentation, don't get me wrong, right? But have it substantiated, really understanding your metrics, even on a micro level, right? If you have 100 people coming to your site, how many end up signing up? How did you change that over time? Small numbers actually tell a lot of truth. A couple hundred signups is a pretty significant sample size. And then there's companies where we need to, they look very put together to begin with, and often from entry to AngelPad to exit to AngelPad, it actually on the surface looks fairly similar, but behind the scenes a lot of things have changed. A great example of this is PaintZen, a company out of our last cohort that does, it's a marketplace for you to get your house painted, your interior painted. They only live in New York right now. Actually, they're, I shouldn't launch them before they launch, so.
They're still
let's just rewind. They're live in New York. And but you should check them out, PaintZen, especially if you have painting needs in San Francisco. When you look at the company, pre-AngelPad and post-AngelPad, it looks very, very similar, but through AngelPad we figured out how to scale this in every state, what are the rules in every state. We figured out a routing system, we figured out how to give a quote based on the square footage of an apartment that we scrape off government websites and zip codes and income by zip code. So the pricing has changed. The way we dispatch people, the way we check in that the painter has arrived. The paint now comes from a different place to the painter, so the painter doesn't have to do the paint job first. All these things, a completely different process, a completely different company, going from an interesting marketplace for painters to a scalable marketplace that can truly change the way painting is done. So those are the different stages. If you ask me, what do we have to do in the next 12 weeks? It's like we work like we've never worked before. We figure out everything. We try to have everything ready so that if investors ask us, we have thought about it.
Huh. And do you take that approach with? You said it's different for everyone, but it's interesting that you say you have entrepreneurs that come in, they're pre-funding, but they have ideas, they have their hypothesis, they have their vision, and you say, no, we need to test this. Let's look at it again. Let's figure out every single box, every single question, every angle that could come at us, and make sure that we're actually building something that people want and that can be as a venture-backed
company. Yes.
Venture-backed company.
Yes.
So what is a venture-backed company? What does that mean?
Thank you. So a venture-backed company is really important to understand for anyone in the room, for anyone that is thinking about taking money from professional investors. A venture-backable company is a company that, and I'm sure there's a great definition for this. If Naval would be sitting here, it had a great definition. But a venture-backable company is a company that tackles a large enough market that can support a massive outcome, right? I often, actually on day one of AngelPad, I often ask the founders, so how is this going to be a $100 million revenue company? And $100 million revenue, that is a lot of money, right? There's very few companies that will ever get to $100 million. I don't even know how many zeros 100 million, I think 9 zeros, right?
Well, you worked at Google. Come on, that doesn't sound
We didn't have that much revenue when I joined.
AngelPad too. You've had some big exits in the hundreds of millions.
That's true, but you really have to understand how to get from here to there.
That's right.
So if you any company that you start, if you can't figure out, if you're tackling a market that is a total market size of $2 billion, and you figure out, oh, I'm going to get 10% of that. That's unrealistic. Like very few companies ever get to 10 or 15% market share in any market.
Yeah.
So it's actually much easier to be 1% of a much larger market than 5% of a smaller market. And it's the same work, right? Like if you build a company, like you spend 12 hours of your day on it, you might as well go for a really large outcome. And there's often, people, especially in New York, when I explain to people what I do that are not in the tech business, and sometimes I get the answer like, oh, so you're like Shark Tank. And, and Shark Tank, if you watch it, like sometimes you have companies that actually are venture backable with large outcomes, and then you have like the lady with the cookie jars that wants to open a second shop. That's not a venture backable company, right? That's a company that should be an LLC, and they make profit, and some of the profit go back to the investors. So if you're in Silicon Valley, you need to build a venture backable company with a very large outcome. You're never expected to return any of the money in dividends. Investors look for returns when you exit, as in when you sell a company or when you go public.
How do you, so I'm building the most revolutionary thing of all time, right? No one's ever done anything like what I'm building. So it's unclear what market or how big that market is, because no one's ever done this before. Do I have to find a market that I can suck wind from and pull energy from, or can I create a new market that's never existed before?
It does help if you can create, like if you can pull it from somewhere. So I think it's very hard as a startup to create something that has never been done before. Like,
Sure.
and go into like, I couldn't even think of something. Is anybody here that feels like they're doing something that's never been done before? They have a very hard time defining what the marketplace is, what the market size is?
Half the room.
All right, shout it out. What is it?
I want to be a part of every technology decision on the planet.
Okay, so that's like innovation management. It's probably a $20 billion market.
So people spend $6 trillion on technology every year. So it's a ramp up to go into that, to start to work out what percentage of time and effort they're spending on those decisions, because they're spending so much money. That if you
So when you hold on, when you talk about $6 trillion, you are confused about the market that you're dealing in, right? Because that's probably like every electronic gadget and every phone that's ever sold in the world or something. Because that's a big number.
Yeah. Exactly.
How many zeros does a trillion have?
Yeah. So it's not the market
13,
that they're going to be. So it's not. I'm not going to obviously be able to supply every technology service on the planet or product. It's just that that's the decision that they're kind of the money that's behind their decisions. So if they say spend 100th of that on choosing it, then it's solving that pain point for them. So yes, you're right. There's a massive difference between what's their, I'm not going to service all their needs.
Right. It's actually, it's a good point you're making, because oftentimes the market sizes are defined incorrectly. So when you, I don't have a good example off the top of my head, but oftentimes people look at the amount of money that's spent in the market
eBay.
Instead of, exactly, eBay is probably a good example. Thanks, threw it out. So eBay, like the market size of eBay, is all the goods sold through eBay because they take a share of that, right? Sorry, actually, that doesn't make sense in my example. Backtrack.
No. You're saying the opposite of that. That eBay's percentage, they have such a small percentage that they're
Exactly.
The market is not all. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not the market size. It's the addressable market is the percentage of revenue that they can actually make.
Right.
And then sometimes founders undersell the market size. Well, we spend a lot of time on market size. Like it's not an easy answer.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to figure out what your market is, what your market size is, what's realistic, and then really get to the point where you can poke holes at it and you still stand after, right? Because that's what happens when you're in front of investors, when you sit down with them. They just poke holes, and you better have all the answers. Or at least you've thought. You might not have the answers, but you better have thought about it before, and don't get surprised by their questions.
Our hashtag is startup grind. At Thomas K.
That's me.
we're going to take questions from the audience in just a minute, so please start getting those ready. I just want to ask you about being honest with your companies, and how as an entrepreneur, how can I get honest answers and honest feedback from the people around me, and how do I really understand and step back from that information? Because I think, you know, we get so wrapped up, being an entrepreneur, it's like the most selfish job in the world, because all you do is think about yourself, right? You think about your company, and you're always thinking about your startup. And you know, for me personally, the only time I don't think about startup grind is when I'm in a movie. Other than that, like if I'm asleep, my wife will wake me up, and I love going to movies, but my wife will wake me up in the morning. She's like, "You won't believe the things you were saying about startup grind last night." You know, I mean, and that's I think pretty typical of somebody that's totally consumed in their startup. How do we first seek out and get great, honest feedback, and how do we then figure out how to work that into what we think is our vision, what we think is, you know, the future? How do we use that to make better decisions and to change where we're going?
It's hard. It's hard. I think getting honest feedback is very hard. And I think, you know, I always try to align the incentives with what you're doing. So, you know, when you ask your friends, they don't have an incentive to be honest with you about the bad idea that you have, because they are your friends, right? So go to strangers that have no incentive in telling you what they think. Ask open-ended questions so people don't get put on the spot. People are usually not inclined to tell you this is dying, right? People are not inclined to tell you the truth if the truth hurts, right? So you really do have to seek it out. You know, I try to be brutally honest with my companies, and I am brutally honest. I had a meeting with one of the companies yesterday. By email, I can pull it out and read to you. I said, I think you're completely misguided, and you're going to be failed. You failed doing what you're doing. And then they called me, and I said, I'm in San Francisco. Let's sit down. We sat down for 2 hours, and a lot of things clarified through that. And I actually like what they're doing now. We're going to make some changes to it. So, you know, I have the luxury of being honest because I'm a shareholder already. You don't have to like me afterwards. You know, I want to maximize your returns because your returns are my returns.
Yeah.
And I think the incentives are very, very aligned there. If you have an investor that wants to do your next round, so if you have a seed investor who's putting in 100K and they want to do your A round, you know, you're not truly aligned because their incentive is for them to still like you. You know, when they offer you money. So just always think about what the alignment is, and try to you know, don't ask people for like, oh, give me what doesn't work. Like, try to figure out the questions so they'll tell you without telling you this really sucks, right? You can say like, what, like how difficult was this to use? You know, how easy was this to use? And when they say no, it wasn't easy, you kind of know it was difficult. Like an UX decision or something.
Or it's like showing them your product. Say, did you like that?
Yeah, exactly. What do you think of it? You like it? I spent 6 months on it.
Yeah.
I'm a UX designer.
I just slept for 3 weeks. Do you like it? Yeah, man, it's great. Right? You really nailed it.
I get a lot of like, oh, I showed it to 10 people and they all want to use it. They all love it. And I'm like, you know, be careful about the false positives. Like, you know, if you ask 10 people if there'll be $20 on the floor, would you pick it up? They would all say yes, right? It's a self-serving question. So if you build an app for connecting people at a conference and you walk around a conference and that person clearly has that need right now because he's looking around trying to figure out who to talk to, it's like, hey, would you use this app? Of course I would. When's the last time you searched for something like this in the App Store? Never. Oh, I guess you don't really need it then, right? So.
Let's give Thomas a big round of applause. Thank you.